On the 26th of May 1940, next to a key road on the approaches to Dunkirk, a group of just 14 men, holding a half-built blockhouse, isolated and surrounded, fought for their lives. Over the course of 4 days, the might of German Blitzkrieg would unleash relentless assaults on the defenders who knew that every moment they continued to hold, more men at Dunkirk could live to fight another day. This is the extraordinary story of the defence of the Peckel Blockhouse. It's no understatement to say that by mid-May 1940 the situation was looking disastrous for the Western Allies. On the 12th of the month, enormous German armoured columns had smashed through the lightly defended Ardennes, outflanking the formidable Maginot Line and splitting the British and Belgians from the bulk of their French allies. By the 20th, the tanks of General Guderian's 19th Panzer Corps had reached the coast and began forcing the Allies further apart. Within days, the British Expeditionary Force was backpedalling towards the Channel ports and evacuation from Dunkirk. In order for most men to make it, some had to stay. The main British defence in this sector of the perimeter would be centred right here at Cresswell, an ancient hilltop town with commanding views of the surrounding countryside. It also formed the hub of the local transport network, with a number of old Roman roads extending out from it like spokes on a wheel. If the Allies could hold Cresswell, they could control the roads and they could slow down the German advance on Dunkirk, and so hold they must. But Cresswell was not the only opportunity for defence in the area. Throughout the countryside were numerous villages, farms, walled gardens and outbuildings, each of which could be fortified. Amongst that number were even a few bunkers and blockhouses, mostly incomplete and ironically constructed far too late as an ad hoc extension to the Maginot Line. One sat right here, near the village of Ardifort, just a few miles north of Cresswell. When complete, it would have covered the vital main road running directly to Dunkirk. Knowing it was there was one thing, but using it for defence was another. In Cresswell on the 26th of May, orders were issued to begin occupying local strongpoints to slow the oncoming tide. Amongst those to be given that daunting task was 22-year-old Acting Lieutenant Roy Cresswell. Born and raised in Gloucester, he had left his teacher training at Bristol University on the outbreak of war and had been commissioned into the Gloucesters a short time later. As the only child to a widowed mother who had lost her husband as a result of the First World War, Roy's choice to volunteer was certainly a powerful one. By May 1940, he found himself commanding No. 8 Platoon of the 2nd Gloucesters. Detached from the main rearguard at Cresswell, Cresswell was sent with a few men to locate the blockhouse on the Dunkirk road and assess its viability as a defensive position. From this point on, we have the advantage of the lieutenant's own words in describing the situation as he found it and events as they unfolded.
At 14:30, I was ordered to take 2 pioneers and 3 men, armed as for a patrol, to carry out the recce of a blockhouse on the Dunkirk road approximately 2.5 miles north of Cresswell. Information required was as follows. Was an entry by force necessary? If so, what tools and help were needed? What was the state of its defence and what improvements were necessary? What was the extent of its field of fire? Would engineer help be needed? The patrol returned at 1700 hours and reported that it lacked doors, proper slits and observation. At the same time, it was occupied by a number of refugees. The original wooden scaffolding was still in position round the building, while a construction hut on the west practically blocked the whole of the field of fire there. To the front, piles of building material, sand, shingle, and timber reduced the field of fire to an absolute minimum range of 75 yards. The position on the eastern side was fair, although piles of earth from an unfinished tank trap and hedges severely limited its possibilities. The north was totally blind. In short, a great deal of work was necessary before the blockhouse was of the slightest use as a strong point.
So not a strong position to say the least. Nevertheless, it did occupy a key location, and given the stakes for the men around Dunkirk, leaving it unoccupied was not an option. Having returned to Cresswell where defences for the town were proceeding apace, Roy Cresswell and 13 men of No. 8 Platoon, A Company, 2nd Gloucestershire Regiment were detached to head immediately back to the blockhouse and prepare to defend it to the last man and last round. Amongst those men were Privates Benley and Comley and Bristol native Lance Corporal Dennis Ruddy. About the same time this was happening, the German army was on the move. By the 26th of May, they'd already captured Boulogne and Calais was under siege. This meant that by now only Dunkirk was available as a viable route back to Britain. Furthermore, the troops now advancing northwards towards Cassel and the scratch group of defenders in the town known as Somerset Force was facing some of the most effective fighting units in the entire German army. Let's head back to Cresswell, who along with his men was feverishly preparing the blockhouse for defence.
Early in the morning, a start was made to improve the fortifications and state of defence. Before this was properly underway, the only meal which we were destined to receive arrived, consisting of tea, a tin of ration biscuits, practically full, and 56 small tins of meat paste. This could be added to the few tins of provisions and eggs brought down by the platoon itself. To block up the two entrances, lengths of concrete, reinforced with iron bar, and sandbags were utilised. The work on the side door was first completed as the Germans appeared on the horizon in the evening. The 6-gun openings, through which were fired 4 Bren guns and 1 anti-tank rifle, were reduced to a reasonable size with the remaining sandbags, while positions of the scaffolding timber were cut away to extend the field of fire.
No sooner had the makeshift door been put in place and the piles of building rubble levelled than gunfire was heard to the south. Cassel was under assault and the Germans were approaching. Roy recalled the moment.
At 1800 hours, the Germans were seen advancing in open order across the western skyline. The side entrance was immediately shut, the heavy fire brought to bear on the advancing enemy, upon which several casualties must have been inflicted at a range of 600 yards. Between 1900 and 2000 hours, a furious attack was launched against us, which was beaten off, the only lasting effect being that one nearby haystack was fired by tracer. This proved to be advantageous to us, since it burnt all night and the light this caused made the work of the lookouts slightly easier.
It was during this first heavy assault, which included supporting fire by 20mm cannon at extremely close range, that Lance Corporal Ruddy was struck by an explosive round bursting inside the bunker, causing horrific wounds to his throat and head. With next to no medical supplies and Ruddy conscious but in terrible pain, that first night under siege for the blockhouse defenders was one of fear and anxiety, punctuated by the cries of a comrade for whom they could do precious little. Mercifully, no concerted attack came through the remainder of that night, but despite their exhaustion from weeks of fighting, no one could sleep. The odd burst of fire at shadows illuminated by the burning haystack kept everyone on edge until the first glimpses of dawn on the 28th. But daylight brought no respite. Almost as soon as the sun was up, the Germans launched yet another ferocious attack on the blockhouse, showering each and every aperture with a hail of fire before advancing towards the position. With rifles and Bren guns, the Gloucesters fought back, checking that advance less than 100 yards from the blockhouse and inflicting many casualties on the attackers as they did so. Unable to breach the British defences, the Germans pulled back and continued to hammer the blockhouse from range to wear the defenders down. During this pause, Cresswell took stock of the situation.
Today, a rigid rationing of the remaining food and water had to be introduced, owing to the failure of the core truck to arrive on the previous evening, as had been promised. The suffering of Lance Corporal Ruddy resulted in most of the water being sacrificed to his needs. The rest of the platoon existed on very little water and rum, which had been found in Cassel.
Throughout the remainder of that afternoon, the sound of heavy fighting and Stuka sirens could be heard over nearby Cassel as the main German assault hammered the hilltop town and the defenders clung on. It was clear though that the defence couldn't last, and in the afternoon the seriousness of the situation became plain to all, when columns of German armour could be seen outflanking both Cassel and the blockhouse in the east. Knowing now that German forces were working between them and their comrades at Dunkirk, and with no way to prevent it, their task became simply one of holding out for as long as possible. If they could continue to deny the enemy the use of the direct road to Dunkirk, they could hold up the advance. but the chance of their own escape was dwindling by the minute. The night of the 28th and into the 29th was relatively peaceful for 8th Platoon, who spent much of their time caring for an ever-worsening Dennis Ruddy. Again though, dawn brought further activity. Cresswell himself recalled the surprising sight of a British prisoner, Captain Lorraine, approaching his position.
This was destined to be one of the worst days we had experienced in the blockhouse. Dawn broke without any activity by the enemy, but about 900 hours, a wounded British artillery captain was seen hobbling on a crutch round the west corner of the blockhouse, shouting, "A wounded British officer here." I immediately answered him, but he replied in a lower voice, "Do not reply." When he reached the east side, he looked down at a dead German and said out loud, "There are many English and Germans like that round here." At the same time, he looked up at the roof of the blockhouse, an action which seemed to indicate German presence on the roof.
Immediately grasping the situation, the men in the blockhouse raced for the incomplete and partially blocked observation tower, only to find a stream of petrol pouring through. An explosion just seconds later heralded another assault as a German stick grenade ignited the fuel and began a fierce fire within the blockhouse. With smoke pouring out of the apertures and a renewed German assault commencing, the men in the blockhouse had to fight the fire and the enemy at the same time, with gas masks their only protection. With Private Benley and several other men hastily erecting a fire curtain across the burning room, the rest fought for their lives. Incredibly, both the fire and the enemy were contained. Despite the seriousness of the situation, there were still moments of light-heartedness, as Cresswell recalled.
At least they failed in their attempt to drive us out into the open, but it improved the warmth inside, which was partly appreciated for it had been very cold inside.
Several other men took advantage of the German-supplied fire to boil the eggs they'd brought down with them from Cassel, which too were appreciated. The situation, though, wasn't improving, but there was still considerable confusion in the area on all sides, and the occupants of the blockhouse made their presence felt. That evening, apparently unaware that 8th Platoon fought on, a German staff car passed down the main road near the burning blockhouse. Opened up on at several hundred yards range with anti-tank rifle and Bren gun fire, the occupants would not reach their destination, and the road remained impassable. As darkness descended once again, thankfully the night passed quietly, with men alternately standing guard, tending to the now very weak Lance Corporal Ruddy, or fighting the fire which persisted in the observation tower. All stayed quiet until around midday on the 30th, when yet another vehicle, apparently not informed of the British defenders in the blockhouse, was knocked out on the Dunkirk road by sustained Bren gun fire. This, though, seemed to infuriate the Germans, who had long since surrounded the position and who were now determined to silence it once and for all. The first sign of that coming attack was seen around 2 PM when a recce party of 4 men were fired upon as they crept towards the blockhouse. Roy describes what happens next.
A period of inactivity on the part of the Germans followed, which was broken by the firing of a haystack to the west and an attack from the east. This was withstood, but they returned to the attack, bringing heavy automatic fire to bear on every gun slit against the entrances. Any attempt on our part to fire through the slits was suicidal, for every enemy shot sprayed through the slits with amazing accuracy. As heavier weapons were brought out of the attack, and further resistance became impossible.
Exhausted, surrounded by hundreds of men, low on ammunition, food and water, and now with an ominous silence in the direction of Cassel, it was clear that the fight was up. The men of the blockhouse, waiting until dark, made one final attempt to reach freedom. Slipping out from their position, they crept northwards, but with tens of thousands of enemy between them and Dunkirk, their effort was futile. After having held the enemy at bay and denied them the use of a major road for 4 days, Roy Cresswell and the survivors of 8th Platoon 2nd Gloucesters fell into enemy hands. Fortunate to survive that experience at a time when many units who had held up the advancing enemy were killed out of hand, 13 men, were disarmed and sent eastwards as part of an ever-growing stream of dejected Allied prisoners. Though it didn't feel like a victory at the time, there was real merit in what Cresswell and his men had achieved. This small rearguard action, repeated across the Pas-de-Calais, had a very real effect. Every minute that those men had held out meant that here, at Dunkirk, another destroyer, barge or yacht could reach those men on the beaches and the eastern mole. Many of them would live to see home thanks to the sacrifices of men whose names they would never know. Of course, the price was heavy. For the men of 8 Platoon, a war spent enduring the privations of captivity was their reward. Though for Cresswell at least, there was a small consolation when he heard as a prisoner that he'd been awarded the Military Cross for the gallantry and leadership he'd shown at the blockhouse. Eventually, in 1945, Lieutenant Cresswell and his men would go home and continue their lives. Roy would marry that same year, finish his studies and become a history teacher. He passed away in 2005, aged 87. Only one of that group would never see home again, Lance Corporal Dennis Ruddy, who died of his wounds on the 2nd of June 1940 as a prisoner of war, and is today buried in Longines Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery near Saint-Omer. He was 21 years old. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy our content, then please consider supporting us via Patreon or YouTube memberships, and be sure to check out our other content on the 1940 campaign right here on YouTube. We want to finish with a final shout out to our friends at Guidl, a groundbreaking new app where anyone with a mobile device can access the knowledge and passion of leading historians and creators to bring the history around you to life. With a vast range of dedicated audio guides of the world's most incredible historical sites, Guidl offers an engaging new way to learn about the history, culture, nature and art in the world around us. So whether, like us, you just love history or would like to make your own contribution to an exciting new project, be sure to head over to guidl.tours to find out more. That's all this time. We'll see you again soon.